Salzburg, 1935. The greatest violin virtuoso alive steps off stage after the thunderous premiere of his Vendetta concerto. And 30 seconds later is found strangled with his own E-string, his priceless Stradivarius smashed, and the words, "The Vendetta is complete," scrawled in blood on the wall. Hercule Poirot has one night to discover. Who hated Enrico Rossi enough to turn music into murder, and who was brave enough to sign the crime with the victim's own soul? Chapter 1. The Melody of Death. From every arched window of the old city, from the narrow lanes that curled like violin scrolls beneath the great fortress, from the terraces of cafes where cream-laden sacerdote melted beneath silver forks, there rose the intoxicating perfume of music. Mozart's birthplace had become, for these few incandescent weeks, the beating heart of Europe's soul. The Salzburg Festival was in full, fevered bloom. In the mirrored foyer of the Festspielhaus, crystal chandeliers trembled with reflected candlelight, and the air itself seemed to vibrate, as though the very walls remembered every note ever played within them. Ladies in backless gowns of midnight silk, and gentlemen with monocles and white tie, drifted like elegant phantoms. Their conversation a low, refined murmur, beneath the distant, tantalizing strain of an orchestra tuning. Oboes weeping, violins searching for their A, the faint, nervous cough of a timpani. It was the evening of the world premiere of Enrico Rossi's violin concerto in D minor, subtitled Vendetta. The title alone had set tongues wagging from Vienna to Milan. Rossi himself had chosen it with that half-smile of his. At once boyish and diabolical, saying only, "Every virtuoso carries a vendetta in his bow arm. Tonight I let mine sing." Enrico Rossi. Even to speak the name was to conjure fire. 42 years old, raven-haired, with cheekbones sharp enough to slice the heart of any woman who dared look too long. Born in a Neapolitan slum, discovered at 9 playing a cigar-box fiddle for soldi, lifted to the courts of kings by the time he was 16. He owned a Stradivarius once played by Paganini himself, the Cannone, though Rossi preferred to call it il mio coltello, my knife. Critics called him the direct descendant of the devil, who once figured in Tartini's Dream. Audiences simply wept, or screamed, or sat in stunned silence, while he dragged tempests from 4 gut strings. Tonight, the Festspielhaus was sold out twice over. Standing room had been sold at black market prices that could have purchased a small vineyard in the Wachau. Royalty mingled with bohemians. A deposed Habsburg archduke stood beside a Jewish conductor who had fled Berlin only months earlier. All of them had come for one reason: to watch Rossi bleed music. High above the throng, in a private box draped in crimson damask, sat a small, immaculate man with a head shaped like an egg, and a moustache so magnificently waxed that it appeared to have been sculpted rather than grown. Hercule Poirot, retired, or so he insisted, from the Belgian Sûreté, had accepted the festival's invitation only because, as he told his old friend the director, one does not refuse an opportunity to hear Paganini's air, even if one prefers the symmetry of Bach. He wore evening dress of impeccable cut, a white gardenia in his buttonhole, and an expression of contented detachment. In his delicate hand he nursed a cup of tisane, chamomile with a breath of verbena, because the champagne, he murmured to the empty air, was a little too exuberant for the little grey cells. Below him, the orchestra filed in, black as crows. The conductor, a nervous Swede, tapped his baton. Silence fell like a guillotine. Then he appeared. The applause began before Rossi even reached the spotlight, a storm breaking against the shores of the auditorium. He strode with the loose-limbed arrogance of a panther. The violin tucked beneath his chin already, the bow dangling from 2 fingers as if it were a riding crop. His tailcoat was midnight blue, almost black, cut so close that it seemed painted onto his frame. At his throat burned a single ruby the size of a pigeon's egg, rumoured to have been a gift from a Russian Grand Duchess, who shot herself when he left her. He did not bow. He simply lifted the violin, drew one languorous note, an open D that seemed to come from the centre of the earth, and the audience inhaled as one organism. For 35 seconds he held that single note, bending it, torturing it, making it throb like a living heart. When at last he released it, the silence that followed was so complete that Poirot could hear the ticking of his own pocket watch. And then he played. The concerto was a beast. It snarled, it seduced, it wept blood. There were passages where the orchestra seemed to chase him in vain, while he danced above them on a tightrope of flame. There were moments so tender that grown men found their eyes wet without knowing why. And always, beneath the beauty, that subtitle, Vendetta, lurked like a stiletto beneath silk. Poirot leant forward, his tisane forgotten. Even he, who claimed music left him unmoved compared to the perfection of order, felt something ancient stir in his chest. The first movement ended in a thunderclap of applause that threatened to bring down the frescoed ceiling. Rossi allowed himself the smallest of smiles, almost shy, almost cruel, and lifted one hand in brief acknowledgement before turning to retune. It was then that a stagehand, pale as parchment, appeared at the wings and whispered something to the concertmaster. The man's face drained of colour. The orchestra's applause faltered. A ripple of unease passed through the hall like wind across wheat. Rossi frowned, lowered his violin, and strode off stage left, still carrying the Stradivarius, without a word. 30 seconds became a minute became 3. Murmurs rose. Someone laughed nervously. A dowager in diamonds fanned herself too quickly. Poirot set down his cup with a delicate click. Something, his moustache told him, was not right. The little grey cells, usually so placid beneath a symphony, began to stir like cats sensing a storm. And then, the scream. It came from backstage, high and animal, slicing through the auditorium like a scalpel. Every chandelier seemed to flicker. A woman in the stalls clapped both hands over her mouth. The sound was not fear. It was recognition of something unspeakable. Poirot was already moving. For a man of his compact stature, he moved with astonishing speed, his patent leather shoes whispering over the carpet as he slipped through a side door marked Künstlereingang, artists only. The corridor behind the stage was a sudden chaos of running feet, shouted German, the acrid smell of terror. A young soprano stood frozen against a wall, her mouth open in a perfect O, mascara tracking black rivers down her cheeks. Poirot pushed past her. He arrived at the threshold of dressing room number 1, Rossi's sanctum, and stopped as though an invisible hand had seized his collar. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rosin, sweat, and something metallic. Enrico Rossi lay on his back across a chaise longue of bottle green velvet, one arm flung out as if still reaching for applause. His eyes, those famous black eyes that could melt a woman at 50 paces, were wide, bulging, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the ceiling. His tongue protruded, dark and obscene. Around his throat, biting deep into the flesh, was a single violin string, silver woundee, the thinnest and deadliest, tied with a perfect vicious knot. Blood had already begun to darken the white tie and stiff collar. On the Persian carpet beneath him lay the Paganini Stradivarius, its belly smashed as though by a hammer, the F-holes gaping like screaming mouths. Splinters of maple, the colour of burnt honey, glittered in the lamplight, and on the wall above the corpse, scrawled in blood that still dripped in slow, deliberate beads, were 4 words in Italian. La vendetta è completa. The vendetta is complete. Poirot felt the little grey cells ignite like a Catherine wheel. From the corridor behind him came the heavy tread of Austrian police boots, the crackle of orders, the first hysterical sobs of the soprano who had discovered the body. Somewhere a clock struck 9. 3 hours yet until the festival curfew, yet it felt as though midnight had already swallowed Salzburg whole. Poirot stepped carefully into the room, his gaze sweeping every detail. The overturned chair, the half-empty glass of Barolo breathing on the table, the rosin dust that glittered like gold on the floorboards, the single white glove, left hand, lying beneath the broken violin, as though it had tried to catch it as it fell. He bent close to the corpse. Rossi's right hand still clutched the bow, horsehair stained, crimson where it had soared against the string that killed him. The ruby at his throat glinted like a third malevolent eye. Poirot straightened, his face graver than any who knew him had ever seen it. Mon Dieu, he whispered to the silent room. The concerto was not yet finished, and already the final cadenza is murder. Somewhere in the distance, the orchestra began to play again, nervously, automatically, trying to restore order with a Mozart overture. But the notes sounded thin, frightened, as though the instruments themselves knew their king was dead. Poirot turned to the first policeman who dared enter. "You will touch nothing," he commanded in crisp, perfect German. "This is not a crime of passion. This is a crime of art. And Hercule Poirot, he does not permit art to be violated twice in one evening." As the policeman stammered assent, Poirot's gaze returned to the blood-scrawled words on the wall. La vendetta è completa. Somewhere in this gilded city, someone had waited 15 years, perhaps 20, for this moment. And they had chosen the night when all the world was watching. The little Belgian smoothed his moustache, and for the first time in many years, felt the old, exquisite thrill of the chase. The music, he thought grimly, has only just begun. Chapter 2. The Gathering Suspects. The Festspielhaus, that temple of harmony, had become in the space of one scream a charnel house of whispers. By the time Hercule Poirot had taken command of dressing room number 1, sealing it with the calm authority of a man who had once closed the doors on the Orient Express itself, the corridors behind the stage resembled a disturbed ant-hill. Stage hands stood in knots, white-faced. A cellist clutched his instrument to his chest, as though it might shield him from evil. Somewhere, a flute player was being sick into a fire bucket. Poirot stood in the centre of the murdered man's sanctum, like a small, impeccably dressed general. The electric lamps had been switched on now, harsh and unforgiving, stripping away the flattering half-light that had cloaked Rossi in myth. In the glare, the corpse looked smaller, almost ordinary, the great maestro reduced to meat and ruin. Inspector Karl Becker of the Salzburg Criminal Polizei arrived breathless, his uniform cap askew, his normally ruddy Tyrolean cheeks the colour of ash. He was a large man, solid as an alpine barn, with a moustache that drooped like a mournful bloodhound. He had met Poirot once before, at a congress in Baden, and the memory clearly daunted him. "Herr Poirot," he began, clicking heels, "the Bundespolizei in Vienna have already telephoned. They insist the case is yours if you will accept it. The festival directorate begs." Poirot raised one kid-gloved hand, a gesture so economical it silenced the inspector as effectively as a gunshot. "First, mon cher inspecteur, we observe. Then we disturb. That is the method." He began, as always, with the body. Rossi lay, supine, legs crossed at the ankles in a posture almost lounging, as though death had surprised him in the middle of a witty anecdote. The violin string, Poirot noted immediately that it was an E of Vision titanium solo manufacture, new, bright, mercilessly thin, had been looped twice around the throat and knotted at the nape with a precision that suggested familiarity, almost tenderness. The skin beneath was lacerated in 2 perfect rings. Tiny beads of blood had dried like garnets. Poirot bent close enough that the tips of his moustache nearly brushed the dead man's cheek. With a silk handkerchief, he lifted the chin gently. "Regardez," he murmured. "The hyoid bone is intact. Death was slow. He was permitted to feel every second of his own silence. That is hatred, inspecteur. Hatred distilled into music." Becker swallowed audibly. Poirot's gaze travelled downward. The ruby at Rossi's throat had cracked during the struggle. A hairline fracture ran through it like a scream frozen in blood. The tailcoat, midnight blue silk faille from Carissini in Rome, was torn at the left shoulder seam, as though someone had seized it from behind. One cufflink, onyx and platinum, was missing. On the floor, the ruined Stradivarius lay on its back, belly stove in by what appeared to have been a single, furious blow from the heel of a man's shoe. The neck had snapped clean, the fingerboard curled away like a dying swan. Shards of varnish glittered amid the rosin dust. Poirot knelt, heedless of his trousers, and with the point of his cane lifted a splinter. He sniffed it delicately. Maple, 1721, Cremona. The scent of 3 centuries, destroyed in 3 seconds, monstrous! His voice shook, but only for an instant. This was not rage, this was sacrilege. He rose and turned his attention to the blood message on the wall. Elle Vendetta e completa. The letters were tall, spidery, written with the index finger of the left hand. Poirot could see the print clearly in the still wet blood. The writer had stood on tiptoe. A faint smudge at knee-height suggested a hurried stoop to dip the finger anew. "Written after death," Poirot said softly. "Observe how the blood has run downward." The heart had already ceased to pump. Our murderer is a person of theatrics. Becker cleared his throat. "We have secured 5 persons who were seen in the vicinity. They are being held in the green room." "Parfait. We shall speak with them. But first—" Poirot's eyes narrowed on a small object, half hidden beneath the chaise longue. He retrieved it with the handkerchief. A lady's evening glove, left hand, white kid leather, faintly perfumed with tuberose, 1 pearl button missing. "Someone lost a glove in the struggle," Becker offered. "Or planted it," Poirot corrected. "We shall see." He gave the room one final sweeping glance, memorizing the position of every overturned score, every scattered photograph. Rossi with Toscanini, Rossi with a smirking Mussolini, Rossi kissing the hand of a veiled woman whose face had been scratched out with something sharp. Then nodded to Becker. "Lead me to the suspects, inspecteur. The orchestra of murder has many players. Let us hear who is out of tune." The green room smelled of cold coffee, fear, and the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes. 5 people sat beneath the eyes of 2 uniformed officers, each occupying a separate island of misery. Poirot entered without ceremony and arranged himself upon a gilt chair as though it were a throne. He placed his cane across his knees, folded his gloved hands atop it, and allowed silence to stretch until it became unbearable. Then he spoke, softly, precisely, in that lightly accented French that somehow made every language sound intimate. Mesdames, Messieurs, one of you has committed a crime so perfect that it is almost a work of art. The others, you are afraid. That is natural. But fear makes the tongue loose and the memory sharp. I am Hercule Poirot. I do not judge. I arrange facts in their proper order. Speak truly, and you have nothing to dread from me. Lie. He smiled, a small, whole, terrible smile. Lie, and the little grey cells will find you out. He began with the woman closest to tears. Sophia Moretti, La Divina Moretti they had called her in Milan, sat wrapped in a sable stole despite the warmth, her glorious auburn hair coming unpinned in tragic coils. Her gown was cloth of silver, now stained with what might have been Rossie's blood across the skirt. Her eyes, magnificent violet, were swollen. "You were his lover," Poirot said simply. "Once," she whispered, voice hoarse from screaming or singing, it was hard to tell. "He discarded me in Rome last year, publicly, on the night of my triumph as Tosca. He laughed from his box while I took my curtain calls. Said my high C was adequate. She laughed, a broken sound. Adequate! I could have killed him for that alone. And tonight, I was in the wings. I wished to watch him fail. He never failed. Then I heard," she pressed the stole to her mouth, "Your glove, madame." Poirot produced the white kid leather like a conjurer. Sophia stared, then shook her head violently. "Not mine. I wear only black gloves with silver. Everyone knows." Next, Victor Lang, the festival intendant. A bear of a man gone to seed, his white tie askew, sweat darkening the armpits of his tailcoat. His hands, huge, scarred from years of shifting scenery, trembled as he lit a cigarette with a gold lighter engraved VL. "Rossi was bleeding the festival dry," he growled in guttural Viennese. 20,000 shillings he demanded for this one performance, threatened to cancel 2 days ago if we did not pay. I was ruined if he did not play. I begged him in this very room not an hour ago. You argued, shouted, he laughed, said money was the applause of fools. Lang's eyes flicked to the closed door behind which the body lay. Then he turned his back on me. Anyone could have... Poirot's gaze moved to Elena Voss. Fräulein Voss was 35, tall, Juno-esque, with ash-blonde hair coiled like a crown. She wore severe black evening dress relieved only by a single diamond brooch shaped like a treble clef. Her violin case, Guarneri del Gesù, 1742, rested on her knees as though it were a child. "You hated him most of all," Poirot said quietly. Elena's ice-blue eyes did not blink. "He destroyed my father. Vienna, 1921. Accused him of forging a cadenza for the Brahms concerto. The scandal finished him. Papa put a bullet through his palate in the Staatsoper cloakroom. Enrico Rossi was 28 then. He stood on my father's grave and played the same cadenza as an encore. I have waited 14 years. Her voice never rose. It was the terrifying calm of a glacier. And tonight? I was in the orchestra room, tuning, alone. Poirot inclined his head. We shall verify. The fourth suspect was barely more than a boy. Franz Becker, 19, the wunderkind pianist from Munich, Rossi's chosen accompanist for the recital portion of the program. His dress shirt was untucked, his hands still flecked with rosin. He kept staring at his fingers as though expecting them to bleed. Maestro said I was to inherit his mantle, he stammered. Then tonight, Before the performance, he told the director I was a competent hack who would be forgotten by Christmas, in front of everyone. He smashed my score on the floor. Tears glittered. I ran. I don't know where. Finally, a surprise. A fifth person had been brought in at Becker's insistence. Karl-Heinz von Stahl, the festival's official photographer, a thin, nervous man with a Leica slung around his neck like a noose. He smelled strongly of fixer and fear. I was taking publicity photographs backstage, he insisted. Maestro Rossi permitted me to document his preparation. I left him alive at 8:47 precisely. I have the negative to prove it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You will develop it at once, under police supervision. He stood small and lethal. 5 motives, he summarized. Love betrayed, money stolen, family honor defiled, career crushed, and artistic immortality threatened. All of them passionate, all of them lethal. But only one pair of hands tied that knot. He turned to Inspector Becker. You will hold them all until morning. No one leaves Salzburg, and you will find me the stage door log, the complete guest list, and, his voice dropped to silk, the other glove. As the suspects were led away, Sophia Moretti paused beside Poirot. Her perfume enveloped him. Tuberose and grief. Monsieur, she whispered, there is something you should know. Enrico kept a locked drawer in his dressing table. Inside was a list. Names, dates, debts that were not financial. He called it his piccolo, Libro Nero, his little black book of vendettas. If someone found it, Poirot's moustache twitched. Then the vendetta may not be complete after all. He watched her go, then turned back to the inspector. Come, my friend, we have a locked drawer to open, a glove to match, and an entire city full of people who wished Enrico Rossi silenced forever. The night is young, and murder, like a great concerto, is only beginning its development section. From somewhere deep in the Festspielhaus came the lonely, echoing sound of a single violin being tuned, high, nervous, unresolved. Poirot shivered, though the air was warm. The second movement had begun. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Orchestra Pit. Dawn had not yet touched the eastern ridges when Hercule Poirot descended the narrow iron staircase that led beneath the stage of the Festspielhaus. The orchestra pit, emptied of musicians, felt like the hollowed rib cage of some great beast. Rows of abandoned chairs stood in perfect formation, music stands tilted like tombstones, a faint haze of rosin still drifting in the shafts of light from the stage lamps above. Poirot walked the narrow aisle between the violins and the double basses, his cane tapping softly. Inspector Becker followed, carrying an electric torch that threw long theatrical shadows. Here, Becker said, pointing the beam at the floorboards directly beneath the soloist's position. A single drop of blood. It fell through the gap in the stage when the body was moved. The murderer must have stood exactly here for some minutes, watching the stage above. Poirot crouched, dabbing the spot with his handkerchief. The blood was already brown and tacky. "Regardez," he murmured. "The drop is perfectly round, no spatter. Whoever stood here was calm, very calm after the act. That is instructive." He straightened and surveyed the pit with the air of a conductor studying a score. Every seat bore a small brass plaque with the player's name. He paused at the concertmaster's chair. Then at the second violins, then, finally, at the principal viola. "Interesting," he said. "The viola player, Herr Kessel, he was absent from the first half of the concert." "A sudden indisposition," the stage manager said, "yet his instrument is still here." The viola lay on its side, case open, a half-eaten pretzel beside it. Poirot lifted the instrument delicately. A faint smear of blood, no larger than a fingerprint, marred the lower bout. Becker exhaled sharply. Kessel swore he was in the lavatory. People swear many things when they are frightened, Poirot replied. We shall speak with Herr Kessel presently. They climbed back to stage level. The great red curtain hung motionless, heavy as a pall. Poirot walked to the exact spot where Rossi had stood during the concerto, closed his eyes, and raised an imaginary violin to his chin. Slowly, he drew an imaginary bow across imaginary strings, swaying as Rossi had swayed. Becker watched, puzzled. Poirot opened his eyes. From this position, the soloist can see directly into the dressing-room corridor through a gap in the scenery flat. A gap no wider than a letterbox, yet sufficient. Our murderer could have watched Rossi return from the stage after the first movement, waited until the corridor emptied, then struck. He moved to the wings. A narrow passage led to the dressing rooms. Halfway along, a small table held a tray, one glass of Barolo, untouched, and a dish of candied violets. Beside the glass lay a rosin cake in silver paper. Poirot lifted it to his nose and recoiled. Cyanide, he said quietly, potent, enough to kill in minutes, yet Rossi was strangled. The poison was prepared, but not used. Why? He wrapped the cake in his handkerchief and slipped it into his pocket. They reached dressing room number 1 again. The body had been removed to the city morgue, but the blood message still glowed dark on the wall. Poirot stood beneath it, head tilted. Observe the height. The writer is tall, or stood upon something. The chaise longue was moved. See the marks in the carpet. Moved, I think, to reach the wall. He opened the dressing-table drawer Sophia Moretti had mentioned. It was locked. From his waistcoat he produced a small leather wallet of picks, and, in less than 5 seconds, the drawer slid open. Inside lay a morocco-bound notebook, black as a missile. Poirot lifted it reverently. On the flyleaf, in Rossi's impatient scrawl, Il piccolo libro nero delle vendette. He turned the pages slowly. Names, dates, sins. Sofia Moretti, Roma, 14 marzo 1934. Tradimento d'amore, umiliazione pubblica, Victor Lang, Salzburg, 1933-1935. Appropriazione indebita di fondi Elena Voss, Vienna, 1921. Distruzione di una famiglia Franz Becker, Monaco, gennaio 1935. Plagio di composizione and, in fresh ink, only hours old. Hercule Poirot, Salzburg, 3 agosto 1935. Curiosità pericolosa. Poirot's eyebrows rose like twin crescents. I am honored, he murmured. Already I am inscribed in the maestro's little black book. But for what offense? He closed the book and tucked it inside his breast pocket. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. A young stagehand appeared, cap in hand. Herr Inspector! The night watchman found something in the garden behind the theatre. A lady's shoe, one only, covered in mud and, the boy swallowed, traces of blood on the heel. Becker took the shoe. Silver kid, high-heeled, the mate to a pair worn by only one woman in the entire festival company. Fräulein Voss, he said grimly. Poirot examined the heel. A dark streak still wet. He touched it, sniffed, then tasted the tip of his finger. Not blood, he announced. Stage blood, glycerine and cochineal. Used in the third-act death scene of tonight's Tosca, in the Kleiners Festspiel house. Curious. He handed the shoe back. Someone wishes us to believe Elena Voss fled through the garden after the murder. Yet the blood is false, and only one shoe is missing. A deliberate trail, mon ami. Someone is composing decoys with the skill of a master forger. Becker rubbed his temples. Then who can we trust? Poirot smiled without humour. No one. That is why Hercule Poirot trusts only the little grey cells. From the depths of the empty auditorium came a sound. 3 soft notes played on a violin, high on the E string, the same deadly string that had strangled a man. The notes hung in the air, then stopped abruptly as though the player had vanished. Becker reached for his revolver. Poirot laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Non, Inspecteur. That was not the murderer. That was a warning. The orchestra pit is no longer empty. Someone is still playing among the shadows." He turned toward the darkness beneath the stage, his green eyes luminous. "And the next movement, I think, will be played pianissimo, before the final, terrible fortissimo." Chapter 4. The Phantom Rehearsal. The clock on the Festspielhaus tower struck 2 in the morning when Hercule Poirot ordered the great stage lights switched on again. The auditorium blazed into sudden merciless life, gold and scarlet and crystal, as though the building itself had been holding its breath since Rossi's death. Poirot stood alone at the footlights, a small black figure against the vastness, and raised both arms like a conductor about to begin the overture to catastrophe. "Mesdames, messieurs," he announced to the empty tiers, yet his voice carried to the very gods. "Tonight we perform a new work. Title, Reconstruction of a Murder. Composer, Hercule Poirot. Duration, until the killer betrays himself, or herself. From the wings, Inspector Becker signaled." One by one, the 5 suspects were brought onto the stage and placed exactly where they claimed to have been at 8:52 p.m., the estimated time of death. Victor Lang was positioned upstage left, near the prompt corner, arms folded, glowering. Sophia Moretti stood center, wrapped in a black velvet cloak, eyes glittering like amethysts in the footlights. Elena Voss, pale and erect, occupied the soloist's mark, her Guarneri case clutched to her breast. Franz Becker sat at the concert grand, hands hovering above the keys, trembling. Karl-Heinz von Stahl, the photographer, was placed in the shadows beside a scenery flat, Leica in hand. Poirot clapped once. "We begin. The first movement of Rossi's concerto has just ended. The audience is applauding. Maestro Rossi has left the stage here." He indicated the exact spot with his cane and walks toward his dressing room. "Lang, you have just quarreled with him about money. You follow him at a distance of 10 meters. Action." Lang hesitated, then lumbered forward, heavy footsteps echoing. "Sophia," Poirot continued, "you are in the wings, watching. You see Rossi pass. You wish to wound him with words. You step out." Sophia glided forward, cloak swirling. For a moment the stage lights caught the silver of her gown beneath, and she looked exactly as she must have looked the night Rossi humiliated her in Rome. She opened her mouth as though to sing an aria of hate, then closed it again, tears starting. "Elena," Poirot said softly, "you are hidden behind the tormentor curtain. You have waited 14 years for this moment. You see him approach. What do you do?" Elena's knuckles whitened on the violin case. Slowly, deliberately, she opened it, drew out the Guarneri, and raised it to her chin. She did not play, but the threat was unmistakable. Franz Becker suddenly slammed both hands onto the keyboard. A violent, atonal cluster of notes crashed through the hall like breaking glass. "He told me I was nothing!" the boy shouted, voice cracking. "Right here, in front of everyone, I wanted to—" "Enough," Poirot commanded. Silence fell again. He walked to the exact spot where Rossi had received the fatal garrote. Now, the corridor is empty for precisely 45 seconds, long enough. The murderer steps from the shadows, loops the string already prepared, already knotted, around the throat from behind, pulls tight, and lowers the body to the chaise. Then Poirot moved swiftly to the wall and raised his arm as though writing in blood, "The message!" Then the violin is smashed in fury or in calculated sacrilege. 45 seconds, no more. He turned to face them, eyes glittering. Who among you could accomplish this in silence, in darkness, in 45 seconds? No one spoke. Poirot smiled his cat-like smile. Then we must make the stage speak. He gestured to Becker. 2 stagehands wheeled forward a dressmaker's dummy wearing Rossi's spare tailcoat, neck circled by a crimson ribbon to indicate the wound. A length of violin string was looped loosely around it. "Fräulein Voss," Poirot said courteously, "you are the tallest. Would you demonstrate how you might have done it?" Elena laid her violin carefully on the piano lid, stepped behind the dummy, and in one fluid motion slipped the string over the dummy's head and pulled. The knot tightened with a soft, deadly hiss. "Parfait," Poirot murmured, "and now release." She did. The dummy sagged realistically. "Madame Moretti?" Sophia approached, tried, but her height was insufficient. She had to stand on tiptoe, and the movement was awkward, noisy. Lang attempted next. His huge hands fumbled, the string tangled. Franz Becker refused entirely, turning away with a sob. Von Stahl, the photographer, surprised everyone. Thin, nervous, almost weightless, he performed the action with eerie grace, as though he had practiced it in dreams. Poirot watched, head tilted. "Interesting," he said at last. "All of you could have done it. None of you should have been able to do it so perfectly on the first attempt. Someone has rehearsed." A sudden sharp crack echoed through the Dier's auditorium. Every head turned. Elena Voss's Guarneri bow had snapped in her hand. The horsehair hung in 2 white ribbons. "Sabotage!" she cried, holding up the broken halves. "Someone filed the wood!" Poirot took the pieces, examined the break. Clean, deliberate, recent. "Another message," he said quietly. "The murderer warns us. I can reach any of you anywhere, even here under the lights." He laid the broken bow across the piano like a corpse. "And now," he continued, "we come to the most important question. Who benefits most from Rossi's death?" He produced the little black book from his pocket and held it aloft. "This belonged to the maestro. It contained secrets worth more than gold. One name in particular is underlined 3 times in red." He opened it theatrically. "Victor Lang," he read aloud. "Debt, 47,000 shillings. Threat, exposure, unless repaid by 15th of August, tomorrow." Lang went the colour of tallow. "That is a lie," he roared. "I paid him." "With what?" Poirot asked gently. "The festival accounts show a withdrawal of exactly that amount 3 days ago, signed by you." Lang lunged forward, face contorted. Becker intercepted him, wrestling him back. Poirot closed the book. The motive grows clearer, but the method, still, the little grey cells are not satisfied. He walked to the footlights and stared out into the empty auditorium. "Someone else was here tonight," he said almost to himself. "Someone who watched the entire performance. Someone who knew exactly when Rossi would return to his room. Someone who left us a false trail of stage blood and a single shoe." He turned back to the suspects. "And someone who is still watching us now." As if in answer, every stage light dimmed for a single heartbeat, then flared again. In that instant of darkness, a woman screamed. When the lights steadied, Sophia Moretti was staring at her cloak. A fresh violin E-string had been threaded through the buttonhole, knotted exactly like the garrote that killed Rossi. The message was unmistakable. The phantom rehearsal was not yet over. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The string through Sophia Moretti's buttonhole was removed with shaking fingers and dropped into an evidence envelope as though it were a live viper. The stage lights, now steady again, felt colder than before. Every face on the stage carried the same question. If the murderer could reach them here, beneath 100 blazing lamps and a dozen policemen, then no one was safe. Poirot, unmoved, merely tucked the envelope into his breast pocket beside the little black book. "Bien," he said briskly. "The killer grows impatient. Impatience is the crack through which truth seeps. Come, we leave the stage. The past is calling us, and the past, mes amis, never lies." He led the way not to the dressing rooms, but down a narrow staircase few knew existed. A servant's passage that smelled of dust, old velvet, and chum, long-forgotten roses. At the bottom lay the Festspielhaus archives, a warren of iron-bound doors and shelves heavy with yellowed programs, contracts and ghosts. Inspector Becker carried a storm lantern. Its circle of light revealed a door marked Privat, Archive 1900-1925. Poirot produced a key he had quietly borrowed from the director's office hours earlier. Inside, the air was thick enough to chew. He moved along the shelves like a man browsing a library of sins. "Here," he said at last, pulling down a leather folder tied with faded red ribbon. "Vienna, November 1921. The scandal that destroyed Elena Voss's father." He laid the folder on a reading table and untied the ribbon. Photographs spilled out. A younger Enrico Rossi, barely 28, smirking beside a shattered man in evening dress, Professor Heinrich Voss, once the most revered violin pedagogue in the German-speaking world. Poirot read aloud from a clipped newspaper article. The young Neapolitan virtuoso, Enrico Rossi, publicly accused Professor Heinrich Voss of forging a cadenza for the Beethoven concerto performed at the Musikverein. Documents were produced, allegedly in the professor's hand, proving the cadenza had been lifted from an unpublished work by the late Joachim Raff. Professor Voss, unable to bear the disgrace, took his own life in the artist's cloakroom that same night. Elena, who had followed them silently, stood in the doorway as though turned to stone. Poirot turned another page. A photograph. Rossi, triumphant, playing that very cadenza at the professor's memorial concert, while the widow Voss, veiled in black, was escorted weeping from the hall. "Your father's bow," Poirot said gently, producing a small evidence bag from his pocket. Inside lay a fragment of ivory and ebony, the frog of an ancient tourte bow. Found beneath the chaise longue. The silver wire is identical to that which bound the fatal string. Your family bow, Fräulein, cut down and used as the instrument of revenge. Elena's composure cracked at last. She sank onto a stool, face in her hands. "I kept it all these years," she whispered. "A relic. I never thought. I would never have defiled it so." Poirot believed her. The little grey cells registered the sincerity in her voice, the horror in her eyes. He replaced the folder and moved to another shelf. This time he drew out a slim dossier marked Salzburg Festspiel, Vertraulich 1933-1935. Inside were bank transfers, forged receipts, and a series of desperate letters in Victor Lang's heavy handwriting, each more pleading than the last, each addressed to Rossi. Lang, who had also been brought down for his own protection, went crimson. "Blackmail," Poirot summarized. 47,000 shillings embezzled from festival funds to cover gambling debts in Baden and Venice. Rossi held the proof. Repayment or ruin, a classic motive. Lang opened his mouth, closed it again, defeated. Next, a thin envelope postmarked Monaco, January 1935. Inside, a single sheet of music manuscript in Franz Becker's youthful hand, a passage clearly marked Cadenza per Rossi. Across it, in red ink, Rossi had scrawled Plagio, and beneath, You will never be more than my shadow. Franz stared at the floor, fists clenched. And finally, Poirot said, producing a scented letter on heavy cream paper, Madame Sophia Moretti, Rome, March 1934. A promise of marriage, signed Enrico, witnessed by 2 cardinals no less. Followed by a second letter 3 days later, returning the ring with the charming phrase, Your voice cracks on the high sea, and so, my dear, does my affection. Public humiliation at La Scala. Another classic motive. Sophia laughed, a brittle sound. I burned the ring. I should have burned him. Poirot closed the last folder. 4 perfect motives, he said. 4 perfect opportunities, yet something is wrong. The crime is too neat, too theatrical. It is almost collaborative. He turned suddenly to the photographer, von Stahl, who had hovered silently at the back. And you, monsieur, you claim to have photographed Rossi alive at 8:47. Where are those negatives? Von Stahl paled. In my dark room at the Hotel Sacha, under police seal. Yet one frame is missing, Poirot said softly. The frame that would show the reflection in the mirror behind Rossi. A reflection of someone standing in the doorway watching. Someone you have protected. Von Stahl's Leica slipped from his fingers and clattered to the stone floor. I developed them myself, he stammered. There was nothing. Poirot's smile was gentle, terrible. There was everything. And you destroyed the negative. Because the reflection was of the one person no one would ever suspect. He let the silence stretch until it screamed. Someone who knew every secret in these folders. Someone who had access to the archives, to the dressing rooms, to the stage itself. Someone who loved Rossi once and hated him more. He looked at each face in turn. The past has spoken, but the past also lies. And the greatest lie of all is that vendetta belongs only to the wounded. Sometimes it belongs to the one who wounds. From the corridor above came the sudden, frantic ringing of a telephone. Becker ran to answer it. He returned 30 seconds later, face ashen. Herr Poirot, the morgue. They have completed the preliminary autopsy. There is something you must see at once. Poirot inclined his head. Then we go. The dead, at least, do not lie. As they filed out, the lantern light caught the edge of a shadow moving behind the shelves, quick as a rat. No one saw it but Poirot. He said nothing, only smoothed his moustache and followed the others into the cold Salzburg night, where the first pale hint of dawn was already bleeding across the sky. Behind them, in the archive, a single sheet of paper fluttered. To the floor. On it, in fresh ink, 2 words. Atto secondo second act. Chapter 6. The crescendo builds. The city morgue lay beneath the Landesgericht, a white-tiled crypt lit by merciless electric bulbs that turned every corpse the colour of old parchment. At 4:30 in the morning, the air was sharp with carbolic and something sweeter, more intimate, the smell of a violinist's rosin still clinging to dead skin. Enrico Rossi lay naked on the steel table, the Y incision already sewn with coarse black thread. The pathologist, Dr. Schreiber, a small man with round spectacles and the weary patience of a priest, greeted Poirot with a nod. "You asked for anomalies, Herr Detective. Here is the strangest." He lifted Rossi's right arm. Beneath the livid bracelet of the garret bruise, almost hidden, were 4 tiny punctures in the soft flesh of the antecubital fossa. Too old, too fresh. "Morphine," Schreiber said. "A large dose, injected perhaps 20 minutes before death. Enough to dull resistance, not enough to kill outright. The strangulation completed the work. Someone wished him conscious for the final moment, yet too weak to fight." Poirot's eyes gleamed. So the garrote was not the only instrument. There was a syringe as well. A duet of death. He bent closer. On the dead man's left palm, faint but unmistakable, was a smear of pale green ointment. Poirot scraped a sample with his penknife. "Absinthe balm," he murmured, "used by only one person in the entire festival company, Sophia Moretti, for cracked lips after long performances. Curious." Becca shifted uncomfortably. She embraced him in farewell 2 nights ago. Publicly, everyone saw. "Or someone took the balm from her dressing table," Poirot replied. "We progress." They returned to the Festspiel house, as the sky over the fortress turned the colour of tarnished pewter. The building, which only hours earlier had blazed with life, now felt like a mausoleum where music itself had died. Poirot gathered the suspects in the director's office, a sombre room panelled in walnut and lined with portraits of Mozart, Mahler, and Toscanini. Rain had begun to fall, drumming against the tall windows like impatient fingers. He laid 4 objects on the green baize desk. The syringe, found minutes ago by a cleaner in the orchestra pit waste bin, wrapped in a blood-stained handkerchief. A torn festival ledger page showing the embezzled 47,000 shillings restored yesterday afternoon. Initialed ER and VL. A telegram, handed in at the Salzburg post office at 7:12 p.m. last night. Addressed to Elena Voss in Berlin. Father's bow, returned tonight. Justice, a single sheet of music manuscript, slipped under Poirot's hotel door at 3 a.m. The slow movement of Rossi's concerto, annotated in red ink, for France, who will never play it. Each object struck its target like a perfectly aimed arrow. Lang stared at the ledger and laughed, a cracked sound. He forgave the debt. Hours before he died. Why kill a man who has just set you free? Elena read the telegram twice, then crumpled it. Berlin? I have not left Salzburg in a month. Someone forged my alibi and destroyed it in the same stroke. Franz touched the manuscript with reverent, trembling fingers. He was going to let me play it after all. He promised me this morning. Sophia alone said nothing, but her eyes never left the syringe. Poirot watched them all, cat quiet. 4 gifts from the murderer, he said softly. Each one a mirror held up to your guilt. Each one false. The handkerchief around the syringe bears monogram SM, but the stitches have been picked out and resewn by a left-handed person. Madame Moretti is right-handed. The telegram stamp is over-inked, done in haste with a rubber stamp stolen from the festival office. The ledger initial ER is written with the wrong pen. Rossi used only Conway Stewart nibs. This is a cheap pelican. And the manuscript, he turned to Franz. Look closely at the clef. It is drawn backwards. Only someone who cannot read music would make that mistake. He let the silence settle like dust. So the murderer is none of you, and all of you. He moved to the window and looked out at the rain-slick courtyard. Someone else entirely is conducting this symphony. Someone who knows your secrets better than you do yourselves. Someone who has studied Rossi's little black book the way a score is studied. Someone who wishes you to tear one another apart before the final cadence. A sudden crack of thunder shook the windows. Poirot turned back, eyes luminous, and that someone is about to make a fatal mistake. Arrogance, mes amis. The murderer believes himself the composer, but every composer must eventually face the orchestra. He reached into his pocket and drew out a 5th object none of them had seen before. A plain white card, heavy stock, edged in black. On it, typed in perfect centrage, tonight, midnight, Mirabelle Gardens, Pegasus Fountain. Come alone, or the next string will be drawn across a living throat. Il direttore Sophia gasped. That is how he used to sign his letters to me, when he still pretended to love me. Poirot weighed the card in his gloved hand. "Then tonight," he said almost tenderly, "we attend a command performance. But this time, the audience will include Hercule Poirot." He slipped the card away. "Inspector Becker, you will place plainclothesmen at every entrance to the gardens, but they will remain invisible. The murderer must believe himself unwatched." Becker nodded and left to make arrangements. The suspects stood frozen, rain lashing the windows behind them like frantic applause. Poirot addressed them one last time before dismissing them to their separate guarded rooms. "Remember this, the crescendo is always followed by silence, and in that silence the truth is finally heard." As they filed out, Elena Voss paused, "Ish," beside him. "If it is not one of us," she whispered, "then who?" Poirot's smile was small and wintry. "Someone who loved the music more than the musician. Someone who believes that by killing the soloist, the concerto can at last be perfected." He turned away, already deep in the little grey cells. Outside, the rain intensified, washing the blood from the city's stones, preparing Salzburg for the final murderous movement. Midnight was only 7 hours away. Chapter 7. Threads Unravel. The Mirabelle Gardens at midnight were black water and silver lamplight. Rain had ceased, leaving the air washed clean and cold. The Pegasus fountain reared in the centre, bronze wings dripping, the great horse frozen forever in mid-leap. Every gravel path glistened like the polished neck of a cello. Hercule Poirot stood in the deep shadow of a yew hedge, motionless as a garden statue, his opera cloak drawn close. Around him, invisible, Inspector Becker's men waited behind statues and topiary, breath held. At precisely 12 strokes of the Nonberg convent bell, a figure appeared at the northern gate. A woman, tall, veiled, dressed in black. She walked slowly, deliberately, carrying no umbrella though the night was still wet. In her gloved left hand, she held something that caught the lamplight. A violin bow, old, its ivory tip yellowed with age. She stopped beside the fountain and waited. Poirot did not move. The woman did not move. Minutes passed, thick as resin. Then, from the southern entrance, another figure, smaller, cloaked, hooded, approached. The two stood 20 meters apart, separated by the fountain's restless water. Neither spoke. The taller woman raised the bow and drew it slowly across the air, as though playing a silent, ghostly note. The smaller figure flinched, then reached into her cloak and drew out a folded sheet of music. For a long moment, they simply regarded one another across the water. Then the smaller figure spoke, voice low, but carrying in the stillness. "You kept your promise," she said. "He is dead." "And you kept yours," the taller replied. "The money is in the violin case behind the statue of Orpheus." A pause. "It was beautifully done," the smaller said. "The string, the message on the wall. He knew at the end, didn't he?" "He knew," the taller woman answered. "He looked into my eyes and understood everything. That was the point." The smaller figure took one step forward. "I want the book," she said. "The little black book. There are other names." A soft laugh from the taller woman. "You think I would leave it for you? It burned with him. Everything burns eventually." The smaller figure's hand moved inside her cloak. Metal glinted. "Then I will take the bow instead. It is evidence. Come and take it." The smaller figure began to circle the fountain. The taller woman mirrored her, bow raised like a fencing foil. Poirot watched, fascinated. Two spiders, he thought, dancing on the same web. When they were no more than 5 meters apart, the taller woman suddenly threw back her veil. Elena Voss, and the smaller figure flung back her hood. Sophia Moretti. For one heartbeat, the garden held its breath. Then Sophia laughed. "Hi, incredulous. You," she whispered. "All this time it was you." Elena smiled, serene as winter. "You wanted him ruined," she said. "I wanted him dead. We each got what we desired, a perfect partnership." Sophia shook her head slowly. "No, you used me. The glove, the absinthe balm, the forged telegram. Every clue pointed to me first, then to Lang, then to Franz. You made me the perfect decoy." "And you made me rich," Elena replied. 47,000 shillings delivered yesterday afternoon. Lang paid you to keep the festival solvent. You paid me to remove the man who was bleeding it. Simple commerce." Sophia's pistol rose. "I will kill you for that," she said conversationally. "You will not," Elena answered. "Because the moment you fire, 20 policemen will descend, and you will hang for conspiracy while I walk free. I left nothing, no letter, no witness, no trace. The bow in my hand is clean. Your fingerprints, however, are on the syringe wrapper the police will find in your room within the hour." Sophia's hand trembled. Poirot stepped from the shadows. "Actually, mademoiselle," he said politely, "the syringe wrapper is in my pocket. Along with the genuine ledger page, the authentic telegram, and the ashes of the little black book, which, incidentally, did not burn at all." Both women whirled. Poirot advanced into the lamplight, flanked now by Becker and 6 officers. "Bonsoir, mesdames. You have performed admirably. A duet of deception worthy of the stage, but the libretto contained one fatal error." He turned to Elena. "You believed Sophia acted alone in paying you. She did not. Victor Lang paid her, yes, but only after I persuaded him, yesterday afternoon, that his life depended on it. The money was marked. The violin case behind Orpheus contains not shillings but newspaper, and the bow you hold," Poirot gestured, "is not your father's. The real one is in my hotel safe. This one was purchased this morning in a shop on Getreidegasse. The shopkeeper will remember the tall blonde lady who paid extra for urgency." Elena stared, composure finally cracking. Sophia lowered the pistol, sudden hope flaring. Poirot continued, almost gently. "You each believed you were the conductor. In truth, you were both soloists in a piece I composed the moment I read the first false clue. The stage blood on the shoe, the backwards clef, the absinthe balm on a dead man's hand that came from a tin you yourself, Madame Moretti, left in the communal dressing-room for anyone to take. Every thread led back to both of you, yet never quite enough to convict one without the other. Until tonight." He produced 2 pairs of handcuffs. Fräulein Eleanor Voss, arrested for the murder of Enrico Rossi. Madame Sophia Moretti, arrested for conspiracy to commit the same. The orchestra may now rest. Elena looked once at the fountain, at the bronze Pegasus, forever straining toward the sky, then at Poirot. "My father's honour," she began, "is not restored by murder," Poirot finished, "only by truth." As the officers moved forward, Sophia suddenly lunged, not at Elena, but at Poirot, pistol raised. Becker fired once. The shot echoed like a cymbal crash. Sophia fell beside the fountain, blood spreading across the wet marble like spilled ink. Elena Voss did not scream. She simply closed her eyes and let the old bow fall from her fingers. It struck the stones and broke cleanly in 2. Poirot stood over the dying woman. "You wish to be rid of him," he said quietly. "Now you are rid of everything." Sophia's lips moved. One word, barely audible. "Brava!" Then silence, broken only by the soft splash of the fountain. Poirot looked up at the sky where the first pale star pierced the cloud. "The crescendo," he murmured, "is over. Now comes the long chapter 8. The false note. Silence in the Mirabelle Gardens lasted only until the echo of Becker's shot had died against the fortress walls. Then the night exploded. Whistles, running boots, shouted orders in Austrian German. Lanterns flared like footlights. Sophia Moretti lay on her back beside the Pegasus fountain, the silver cloak now a shroud, eyes already glazing under the indifferent stars. Elena Voss stood motionless between two policemen, wrists cuffed, face carved from ice. She did not look down at the woman who had been her accomplice and betrayer. She looked only at Poirot. "You let her die," she said, voice flat. "Non, mademoiselle," Poirot replied quietly. "She chose the final cadence herself. I merely refused to stop the orchestra." Becker knelt beside Sophia, feeling for a pulse that was no longer there. He rose slowly, face grey. "She is gone, Herr Poirot, and everything you predicted. It happened exactly as you said." "Exactitude," Poirot murmured, "is the courtesy the murderer owes the detective. Tonight he was discourteous." He turned to Elena. "You believed the story would end with your arrest and her death. A tragic Liebestod for the newspapers, but the score is longer than you imagined." He produced the little black book from his pocket and held it up so the lantern light caught the morocco cover. "This did not burn, and it contains one final entry, written in a hand that is not Enrico Rossi's." He opened it to the last page and read aloud. 3rd of August, 1935 midnight. If I die tonight, know that the true hand on the bow belonged to the one person who loved me enough to destroy me, and whom I destroyed first. Forgive her, E.R. Elena stared as though the words were written in fire. "That is impossible," she whispered. "He was already dead when I wrote the message on the wall." "Precisely," Poirot said. "Which means someone else wrote this entry. Someone who knew the exact hour, the exact method, and the exact motive. Someone who forged Rossi's hand perfectly because he had studied it for years." He closed the book with a soft snap. "Someone who was never a suspect at all." A new figure stepped from the darkness beyond the fountain. Franz Becker, the 19-year-old prodigy, coat collar turned up, eyes wide and ancient. The boy's hands were empty, yet every policeman reached instinctively for his weapon. Franz stopped 10 paces away, raindrops glittering in his hair like rosin dust. "I did not come to run," he said, voice steady. "I came to finish the concerto." Poirot regarded him almost tenderly. "You, mon petit, are the false note we have all been waiting to hear." Franz smiled, a small, heartbreaking smile. "Maestro Rossi took everything from me," he said simply. "My music, my future, my name. He stole the cadenza I wrote when I was 15 and published it as his own. He told the world I was a thief when I dared protest. Then, last year, he took something even more precious." He looked at Elena Voss. "He took you." Elena flinched as though struck. "You were 17 when he seduced you in Munich," Franz continued, voice soft, relentless. "He promised marriage, a joint recital tour, a life. Then he discarded you the way he discarded all of us. I found your letters in his desk last month. That was when I understood. The only way to free you was to kill him in a manner so spectacular that no one would ever doubt your innocence, because you would be the most obvious suspect, and therefore the least possible." He turned to Poirot. "I staged everything. The glove belonged to Sophia. She left it in the wings weeks ago. I kept it. The absinthe balm was from her dressing table. The backwards clef on the manuscript. I cannot read music backwards. No one can. I wanted you to notice. The marked money, the forged telegram, the broken bow. All breadcrumbs leading you in circles until you reached the garden tonight, where Elena would be forced to confess, and Sophia would silence her forever. 2 birds, 1 perfect shot." He spread his empty hands. I even wrote the final entry in the black book this afternoon, using the fountain pen I stole from his pocket during our last lesson. I knew you would read it aloud. I wanted Eleanor to hear his forgiveness. She deserved that much." Elena Voss began to weep, silent, tearing sobs that shook her entire frame. Franz looked at her with unbearable tenderness. "I loved you both," he said, "him for what he taught me, you for what he broke in you. Tonight I tried to mend it with blood. I failed." He reached slowly into his coat and drew out a thin silver object, the missing onyx cufflink from Rossi's shirt. "I took this from his cuff while he was dying," he said, "so I would always have a piece of him that no one else could touch." He placed the cufflink on the wet marble beside Sophia's body. Then he knelt, placed his hands behind his head, and waited. Becca moved forward, almost reluctantly, and cuffed the boy. Poirot watched in silence as Franz was led away. The garden seemed suddenly empty, as though all the music in the world had walked out with him. Elena Voss found her voice at last. "He was a child," she said brokenly. "Rossi destroyed him too." "No," Poirot corrected gently. "He was never a child after the first betrayal. He became the perfect avenger. Cold, brilliant, invisible, the false note that destroyed the entire symphony." He turned to Becca. "Charges, murder, conspiracy, forgery, theft. The evidence is complete." As they walked back toward the gates, Poirot paused beside the fountain. He picked up the broken halves of the old taut bow that Eleanor had dropped. "Wood and horsehair," he said softly. "Such fragile things to carry so much hatred." He let the pieces fall into the water. They floated for a moment, then sank. Behind them, the first pale light of August 4th touched the fortress walls. Somewhere, a church bell began to ring the Angelus. Poirot looked up at the brightening sky. "The festival will go on," he said. "They will play Mozart tonight. And no one will ever hear the Vendetta concerto again." He smoothed his moustache, turned up his collar against the dawn chill, and walked away between the dripping hedges. The case was closed. But in the quiet little grey cells, one note still lingered, unresolved, tragic, and unbearably young. Chapter 9. The Diminuendo of Deceit. The Festspielhaus, at 10 o'clock on the morning after the blood in the Mirabelle Gardens, wore mourning without knowing it. Black crepe had not yet been hung, yet every corridor felt draped in it. The great chandelier in the foyer hung unlit. Dust sheets covered the seats like winding sheets. Only the stage itself remained naked, stripped of scenery, waiting for the final reckoning. Hercule Poirot had commanded that no one leave Salzburg until the entire score was played to its last bar. Now, in the empty auditorium, 5 people sat in the front row as though attending their own funeral. Victor Lang, hollow-eyed and unshaven. Elena Voss, still in the black dress, wrists bandaged where the cuffs had bitten. Franz Becker, pale as a score page, flanked by 2 silent officers. Karl-Heinz von Stahl, the photographer, clutching his broken Leica like a rosary, and surprisingly, Inspector Karl Becker himself, cap in hand, face heavy with the knowledge that the case had slipped through his fingers until Poirot caught it again. Poirot walked onto the bare stage alone. He carried no notes, only the little black book and the calm of a man who has heard the final, hidden modulation. He did not raise his voice. In the hush, it was unnecessary. "Mesdames, messieurs," he began, "last night you believed the drama concluded with gunfire beside a fountain. You were mistaken. That was merely the fermata, the held breath before the ultimate resolution. Now we play the true finale." He opened the book but did not read from it. Enrico Rossi was a monster of talent and cruelty. He collected broken hearts the way others collect programs. Yet monsters, too, are murdered for precise reasons, and precision is the enemy of chaos. This crime was too precise, too musical, to be born of simple rage. He turned to Franz Becker. You, mon jeune ami, were the perfect disciple. You studied your master's hand, his pen, his habits, his very cruelties. You forged the entries, planted the glove, smeared the balm, snapped the bow. You even injected the morphine, stolen from the festival doctor's bag, so that Rossi would feel the string bite slowly. You wished him to suffer as he had made others suffer. Admirable hatred, flawlessly executed. Franz lifted his head. His eyes were dry now. Ancient. I regret nothing, he said quietly. He earned every second. Poirot inclined his head, acknowledging the honesty. Yet you did not act entirely alone. He turned to Elena Voss. You supplied the E-string from your father's bow, cut and prepared months ago. You wrote the message on the wall in blood, your own blood, drawn earlier from your arms so it would flow convincingly. You allowed Franz to believe you were innocent, even while you guided his hand. You wanted revenge, yes, but also absolution. By letting the boy take the greater guilt, your father's honor would remain unsullied, a delicate calculation. Elena's lips moved soundlessly. She closed her eyes. Poirot faced Victor Lang. And you, monsieur, paid the final installment of the 47,000 shillings not to Sophia, but directly to Franz, believing you were buying Rossi's silence. Instead, you purchased his death. The receipt in your office, signed F.B., is now in Inspector Becker's hands. Complicity through greed. Lang buried his face in his huge hands. To von Stahl, you destroyed the negative that showed Franz entering the dressing room at 8:46. You did it for love of the festival, you said. In truth, you did it for fear. Franz had photographs of you forging press credentials. Blackmail within blackmail. A Russian doll of deceit. Von Stahl whimpered. Finally, Poirot looked at Inspector Becker himself. And you, mon collègue, delayed searching Franz's room because the boy reminded you of your own son who died in the Dolomites last winter. A moment of humanity in a night of monsters. It nearly cost us the truth. Becker's head bowed. Poirot closed the book. Thus the orchestra was complete. A boy who loved too fiercely, a woman who hated too long, a director who paid too much, a photographer who feared too greatly, and an inspector who grieved too deeply. Each of you played your part. Together you composed a perfect crime. He let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Yet perfection is the privilege of God alone, and God sent Hercule Poirot. He placed the black book on the edge of the stage. Inside the back cover, pasted beneath the end paper, is the one thing none of you thought to look for. A single sheet of onion skin, Rossi's final letter, written yesterday morning and hidden there by his own hand. It names Franz as his illegitimate son, acknowledges the theft of the cadenza, begs forgiveness, and bequeaths the Paganini Stradivarius, repaired at his own expense, to the boy. It is witnessed by 2 notaries and dated, legally binding. Franz stared, uncomprehending. Poirot's voice softened. Enrico Rossi intended to announce it tonight, after the concerto. Public penance, public restitution. He wished to make you his heir in the eyes of the world. You killed your own father hours before he could save you. The boy made a sound like a string snapping. Poirot stepped back. Franz Becker, you are under arrest for parricide. Elena Voss, for conspiracy and accessory to the same. Victor Lang, for criminal embezzlement and financing murder. Karl-Heinz von Stahl, for destruction of evidence, The circle is closed." He turned to leave the stage, then paused. "One last note. The Vendetta concerto will never be played again. But last night, in the morgue, Dr. Schreiber discovered something curious. Rossi's heart, monstrous, yes, was enlarged on the left side. Calcified valves, perhaps 6 months to live. The murderer, whichever of you held the string, did not kill a man. He granted a mercy." Poirot looked at Franz, broken on the seat. "Your father would have died in slow agony, publicly diminished. You gave him a swift, brilliant exit on the night of his greatest triumph. In your hatred, mon fils, you also loved him." He walked to the wings. Behind him, Franz Becker began to sob, not the tears of a murderer, but of a child who has lost his father twice. The auditorium lights dimmed slowly to black, as though the theatre itself were taking its final bow. From the darkness, Poirot's voice, soft as a cello's lowest note, "Justice is served, but mercy is the unresolved cadence that haunts us forever." Chapter 10. The Final Bow. The morning of the 5th of August 1935 dawned clear and mercilessly beautiful. Salzburg, washed clean by 2 nights of rain, glittered like a freshly tuned instrument. From the Hohensalzburg fortress, the flags of Austria and the festival snapped in a brisk mountain wind, and the Salzach ran bright as a new silver string. In the Grosses Festspielhaus, the house lights were already up for the evening's performance. Mozart's Don Giovanni, untouched by scandal, immortal. Workmen swept the last shards of the ruined Stradivarius into a dustpan. The blood had long since been scrubbed from the dressing-room wall. Life, like music, must go on. At 11 o'clock precisely, Hercule Poirot took his usual table at the Café Tomaselli in the Alta Markt. He wore dove-grey gloves, a white carnation, and an expression of profound satisfaction. Before him lay a cup of chocolate so thick the spoon stood upright, and a letter on heavy cream paper sealed with crimson wax. He slit the envelope with a silver knife. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, the courts have been swift. Franz Becker has confessed everything. He will be tried as an adult. Parricide is parricide. But the letter you discovered has moved even the Staatsanwalt to mercy. He will serve his sentence in a prison where there is a piano, and where he is allowed to compose. Elena Voss has asked that her father's bow, what remains of it, be buried with her when her time comes. She will hang, but quietly, without spectacle. The Paganini Stradivarius has been repaired at the expense of the Austrian government. It will be played tonight by a young Jewish violinist who fled Vienna last year. The program simply says, in memory of Enrico Rossi, who loved music more than he loved people. You gave us justice, but you also gave us back our music. For that, Salzburg will never forget Hercule Poirot. With deepest gratitude, Karl Becker, Inspector, retired this morning. Poirot folded the letter, slipped it into his breast pocket beside the little black book, now returned, empty of secrets, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. A shadow fell across the table. Franz Becker stood there, pale and thin in a prisoner's grey suit, wrists cuffed but escorted only by a single guard who waited at a respectful distance. The boy's eyes were red but steady. "They allowed me 1 hour," he said, "to say goodbye to the city, and to you." Poirot indicated the opposite chair. "Sit, mon enfant, chocolate is ordered." Franz obeyed. For a long moment neither spoke. At last the boy said very low, "I hated him, and I loved him, both are true." "Both are human," Poirot replied. "Your father was a genius and a thief. You are his son in every sense. Genius steals, only mediocrity asks permission." Franz managed a ghost of a smile. "Will anyone ever play the Vendetta concerto?" Poirot considered. "Perhaps one day when the world is kinder, or perhaps never. Some music is too dangerous to be heard twice." A waiter brought a second cup. Franz wrapped his cuffed hands around it as though it were warmth itself. "I wrote something in the cell last night," he said. He reached carefully into his pocket and slid a single folded sheet across the table. Poirot opened it, 4 bars only, in a young, trembling hand. "Adagio espressivo, beneath the final double bar, a dedication, for E.R. Forgive me, I understand now." Poirot read the notes once, twice. His eyes softened. "It is beautiful," he said simply, "and it is finished. That is the difference between you and him. He never finished anything except hurting people. You have finished your pain." He folded the page and returned it. "Keep it. One day when you are free, you will orchestrate it, and the world will listen without knowing whose blood paid for every note." Franz looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. The guard touched his shoulder. Time was up. At the door the boy paused. "Monsieur Poirot, do you believe in forgiveness?" Poirot considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "I believe," he said at last, "that forgiveness is the only cadenza that resolves in a key no one expects. Your father asked for it. You have granted it. That is enough." Franz was led away. Poirot watched until the grey figure disappeared into the bright morning crowd. That evening, in the Festspielhaus, the repaired Stradivarius sang again, clear, heartbreaking, alive. The young violinist from Vienna played the slow movement of the Mendelssohn concerto with a sweetness that brought tears to hardened critics. In the third row, Hercule Poirot sat very still, eyes closed, letting the music wash the last traces of blood from his soul. When the final note died and the applause thundered, he opened his eyes and looked at the empty seat beside him, reserved, without explanation, in the name of E. Rossi. He placed a single white gardenia upon it. Then he rose, bowed once to the stage, and walked out into the Salzburg night. Behind him, the orchestra struck up the overture to Don Giovanni, bright, mocking, immortal. Somewhere, in a prison cell with a barred window, a 19-year-old boy began to write the first movement of a new concerto. He titled it, very simply, Riconciliazione. And high above the city, the fortress bells rang midnight, clear and forgiving, as though all vendettas had finally been laid to rest beneath the mountains. Hercule Poirot adjusted his hat, smoothed his moustache, and boarded the waiting fiacre. "To the station, if you please," he told the driver. "Vienna, and then order, symmetry, and perhaps a little peace." The horses moved off. The bells faded. The festival lights dimmed one by one. The case was closed. The music, true music, had survived,